ready to go deep. Today we're diving into emotions and meditation, and a little bit about forgiveness, too.
Sounds intense.
It is. You guys sent us some really interesting stuff.
Like what?
We've got excerpts from conversations between the Dalai Lama and Paul Ekman.
Wow, those are some big names.
They are. They talk about things like emotional profiles and, of course, meditation.
Interesting. I'm guessing we also have some of Ekman's research on emotional responses.
Exactly. And some studies on how meditation impacts our emotions.
I'm ready to dive in.
Me too. So what's this deep dive all about? It's about understanding those roadblocks we all hit when it comes to really experiencing emotions constructively.
And figuring out how mindfulness and meditation can help us get better at navigating those emotional ups and downs.
That's it. So let's start with this idea of emotional profiles. It's Ekman's idea that everybody kind of experiences emotions in their own special way.
Right, so some people, they're quick to anger, while others, it takes a lot to really get them riled up.
And some people, their reactions are super intense but fade quickly.
And others, they might hold on to those feelings for much, much longer.
It's like we each have our own unique emotional fingerprint.
Yeah, I like that. And it's fascinating how we all react so differently to the same situation.
Oh, absolutely. Ekman actually talks about some research done on babies.
Babies.
Yeah, right after birth, actually.
Wow, that's interesting.
They looked at Navajo, Japanese, and European American infants.
What were they studying?
They wanted to see how these babies reacted to having their breathing obstructed for a moment.
Oh, wow. I bet the parents were a bit nervous about that.
It was a controlled test, so everything was fine. They just needed to make sure the babies would struggle a bit if their airways were actually blocked.
I see. For safety reasons.
Right. But here's the thing. The babies reacted so differently to the test.
Oh, really?
The Navajo babies were the calmest. The Japanese babies showed a little more movement. And the European American babies, they had the strongest reaction of all.
So could this be like a super early sign of those unique emotional profiles?
That's what's so interesting. This research suggests that our emotional profiles might be influenced by genetics.
So it's not just about how we're raised or what we experience in life.
It seems like we might actually be predisposed to certain emotional patterns right from the start.
It makes you wonder how much of our emotional responses are hardwired.
Right. Nature and nurture working together. So how does all of this relate to our everyday lives?
Well, when you start to understand your own emotional profile and the profiles of the people around you, things start to make a lot more sense.
Like when someone cuts you off in traffic.
Exactly. That might send you through the roof.
But for somebody else, it's no big deal.
Right. So recognizing those differences can make a huge difference when it comes to communication
Yeah.
and empathy, especially for those with those fast onset, high intensity profiles. Those folks who react really strongly and quickly.
Learning to manage those big emotions, that can be tough.
It can be. And that's where mindfulness training comes in. It can really help people create a little space between a trigger and their reaction.
So they have more control over how they respond.
Exactly. And that's a great segue to our next topic, meditation.
The Dalai Lama and Ekman talk a lot about this.
They do. And they even share a story about a monk.
Oh, what about?
Well, this monk was practicing really intense meditation, focused a lot on death and impermanence,
That's pretty heavy stuff.
It is. And after a while, the monk actually started experiencing anxiety and depression.
Really? So you're saying too much meditation can be bad?
Well, the Dalai Lama's point is that it's all about balance. He's not saying we should go to extremes.
So moderation even with meditation.
Right. And this brings us to Ekman's research on meditation's effects on our emotional lives. He did a study, a very scientific one. Participants did secular meditation practices and had some training in emotional skills for 8 weeks.
And they compared them to a group that didn't do any of that.
Exactly, a control group.
And what did they learn?
The results were really interesting. The folks who did the meditation and training, they got a lot better at dealing with stress.
That's pretty cool.
They tested them with public speaking. And then they had them talk about marital conflicts, which can get pretty stressful too.
Makes sense. So meditation can actually help us stay calmer under pressure.
It seems that way. And what's really interesting is that the study also showed the importance of involving both partners in any kind of intervention for marital problems.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's not just about one person changing.
Right. The effects of meditation can actually ripple out and impact our relationships.
Exactly.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But before we jump into forgiveness, I want to go back to how we can actually use all this information. We know meditation can help, But what can we do, like right now, to manage those everyday stresses?
That's a great question. And there are some really helpful techniques we can use. We'll get to those a bit later. But first, let's explore this complex and sometimes pretty tough topic of forgiveness.
This whole discussion about forgiveness, it
Yeah.
really makes you think about those tough emotions,
Mhm.
especially when someone's been hurt. And, the stuff you gave us, it actually tackles this head on. There's this story, really powerful, from a book called The Wisdom of Forgiveness.
Mhm.
Victor Chan wrote it.
Oh, I think I've heard of that book. What's the story about?
It's about this young Tibetan boy.
Mm.
He's imprisoned, and they're going to execute him because of things his father did,
Yeah.
fought against the Chinese government. And right before they execute him, a Chinese officer, he beats the boy really badly, wants revenge for what the boy's father did.
That's awful. Just heartbreaking. It really makes you think about how far compassion and forgiveness can go. Like, where do you draw the line?
It does. And what's interesting is the Dalai Lama's take on it. He talks about forgiving the officer, having compassion for him. And he brings up Buddhist ideas about interdependence and karma. Are you familiar with those?
I've heard of them, but a little refresher never hurts.
Right. So interdependence is the idea that everything's connected, all beings, all events. And karma suggests that what we do has consequences in this life, and according to Buddhists, in future lives too. The Dalai Lama, he's saying that maybe this officer, he's acting from a messed up view of reality, maybe even influenced by propaganda.
So he's not saying what the officer did was okay, but he's trying to understand why he did it, the suffering that led him to that point.
Exactly. And he makes a distinction between the person and the action. Like, forgiveness is for the person who's trapped in their own suffering, not for the bad thing they did.
It's a different way of looking at things, shifting the focus from blame and punishment to understanding and compassion.
It is. But Paul Ekman, he has some things to say about that, like how much choice did the officer really have? And can propaganda really be an excuse for that kind of cruelty? He points out that not everyone who's exposed to propaganda ends up doing violent things. Some people resist, even if it means risking their own lives.
That's true. It makes you wonder about personal responsibility and whether forgiveness means you don't have to face consequences for what you did. This whole story and the conversation around it, it really forces us to think about what we believe about forgiveness and compassion and what it means to hold someone accountable for their actions.
It does. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But what we can take away from this, regardless of forgiveness, is how to stop ourselves from having those automatic destructive reactions in the heat of the moment. Because even if we choose not to forgive, learning how to deal with those intense emotions, that's got to be helpful.
For sure. So how do we do that? How do we keep from getting totally swept away by anger or frustration or even hate?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right. Mindfulness, that's key here.
Yeah.
Ekman talks about this thing called the refractory period. It's that time right after we have an emotional reaction where we can't see anything clearly. We just react. It's like we're blind to any information that doesn't fit with how we're feeling in that moment.
Like we've got blinders on.
Exactly. And we're stuck in this emotional whirlwind. And to explain the different levels of awareness we can develop, Ekman uses this really interesting metaphor. He talks about it like going to school.
I'm always a fan of a good metaphor. Lay it on me.
So the kindergarten level, that's understanding things after the fact. It's like that aha moment we have after we've said or done something dumb in the heat of the moment.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling.
Then you've got high school level. This is where you maybe start to realize you're upset while you're still upset, but you can't really control it.
So you see the blinders, but you don't know how to take them off.
Right. And then you get to the PhD level. Now, this is where you can actually see the urge to react before you do anything.
Now we're talking. So instead of just being controlled by our emotions,
Mhm.
we can actually make choices. Is there a level after that? Like, what's the ultimate goal?
There is. Ekman calls it postdoctoral level. And this is the big one. This is where you don't even have that harmful impulse in the first place. But that takes years of practice.
Sounds tough, but also amazing. Is there anyone who's actually reached that level?
There are actually. One really interesting example is this guy, Matu Ricard. He's a Buddhist monk, but he's also a scientist. He spent years meditating, and researchers have studied him. And it's amazing, even in really tough situations, he stays super calm. Like, they had him talk to this really difficult person, and he didn't get flustered at all. And his startle reflex, it's barely there.
So all that meditation, it's like built a wall between triggers and reactions.
Seems like it. He's a great example of what mindfulness and meditation can do. But most of us aren't monks who can spend hours meditating. So what can the rest of us do? How do we find more balance in our everyday lives?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Matu Ricard's amazing, but most of us can't just, drop everything and become monks. So what can we do, like in our normal lives,
Yeah.
to get better at handling our emotions, I mean?
Well, there are some pretty practical things we can try to create more space between those triggers and how we react. Remember Ekman's story about pre-warning? The technique he and his wife use.
Oh, yeah, when they need to talk about something tough, they give each other a heads up.
Exactly. It gives them time to get ready mentally.
I like that, instead of just springing it on them.
Right. And they even write letters to each other sometimes.
What, letters?
Yeah, especially when things get heated.
That's interesting. Why letters?
Well, when you write things down, it helps you to slow down. Think about what you're feeling and choose your words carefully.
It takes the heat out of the moment.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool how that connects to the Buddhist teaching about not taking things too seriously.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, finding a little lightness, a little humor can help a lot when you're dealing with tough emotions.
That makes sense. Finding that balance. It's serious, but you don't have to get totally consumed by it.
Right.
So besides writing letters, are there other things we can do to bring more mindfulness and lightness into our lives?
Definitely. Even something simple like focusing on your breath can help.
Just taking deep breaths.
Yeah. When you're feeling overwhelmed, just a few slow, deep breaths can make a big difference. And there's walking meditation, too. Have you ever tried that?
I've heard of it. What's so good about that?
It's a great way to be more present. Really pay attention. As you're walking, focus on your feet hitting the ground, how your body moves, the air on your skin.
And what about mindful eating? I've been trying to do that more
Oh, yeah, mindful eating is great. We tend to just rush through meals.
without even thinking about it.
Right. Mindful eating is about slowing down, appreciating the food, pay attention to the flavors, the textures, how it smells. Really taste each bite. It's a great way to be more grateful, too, and more present.
It's amazing how you can bring mindfulness into so many parts of your day.
Exactly. And all these practices help us get better at noticing what's going on inside us. That self-monitoring, that's how we catch those little emotional sparks before they turn into a huge fire.
Instead of getting swept away by a wave of anger or whatever, you can actually ride it out, like a surfer.
I like that analogy.
It's about having that little bit of space between the trigger and your reaction. That's where you have the power to choose.
You got it.
Wow, this has been a really interesting look at emotions and meditation and even forgiveness.
It has.
We learned that we all have our own unique ways of experiencing things, but we're not stuck with them.
Nope, we're not.
We can learn to be more balanced, more aware of ourselves, and things like mindfulness and meditation can help.
Even simple things like deep breathing or taking a mindful walk.
Yeah, and even though forgiveness is complicated and it's a personal choice, understanding how our emotions work can help us handle tough situations better, whether we forgive or not.
It's all about that space between what happens and how we react. That's where the magic happens.
So what about you guys listening? What emotional habits do you want to change? How can you create more space to respond thoughtfully?
And how can you face those challenges with more understanding and compassion?
Keep learning about this stuff. Dive into mindfulness and meditation. Even small steps can make a difference and lead to a happier life.
Absolutely.
This has been great. Lots to think about. I hope you all keep exploring your own emotional landscape
Yeah.
with curiosity and with kindness.
Great advice.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.